G'day and welcome again to the Campfire Project Panel discussion. Today I have with me Adrian Hanks, who is a life mastery wizard. How are you, Adrian?
I'm really good, Alan. Thanks. In warm Queensland, it's fantastic.
Adrian's been rubbing in as how warm it is up there while we're cold down here in the south. And then we have Michael Myers, who is a personal growth exploration and keynote speaker. How are you, Michael?
Really good, Alan. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. And I believe it's nice and cold over there in Alice Springs where you are.
Yeah, a bit brisk this morning. It was 0 degrees, but it's not too bad.
I think I'll stop complaining about Newcastle then. And then we have Thomas Graham, who is an Indigenous radio personality. How are you, Thomas?
Good, mate. How are you?
Good, thank you. Now, we've been having a bit of a chat before the panel started, talking about how over the last few months of turmoil with the world and COVID-19, there is a need to address broader issues affecting many people and the need to assist where possible. Now, the question is our cup half full or half empty? Facing adversity, home issues and shame, a discussion we thought we'd have about the acceptance, the resilience, and the movement, how we can actually be able to put our lives in a better order. So what I'd like to do, if you would mind, Michael, is to start us off on the conversation.
Oh, thanks very much, Alan. It's been obviously a very traumatic time for a lot of people. There's a lot of turmoil. There's a lot of undue pressure being applied to people that they weren't aware that they were going to be involved with. You don't plan your life around things like this. They just happen. The situation I've noticed with isolation, obviously, that's been the biggest bugbear for a lot of people. They're not used to their own company, let alone the company of somebody else for 24/7 for such a long period of time. It's now that relaxation of some of the rules and regulations, and there's people out and about a little bit more often, it's quite noticeable that they relish interaction with others, and they're not comfortable with themselves for a long time. It's really, really evident. It's the stress that's been put on relationships has been profound, absolutely profound in a lot of cases. There's been a lot more violence around domestic violence in home situations. Kids are a little bit more stressed out. It's a natural phenomenon when you get isolated like this and when things like this and it goes down the food chain and the breadwinner, be it mother or father, they start to stress because they don't have income or because they can't get to work or are not allowed to go to work. The kids don't really understand what's going on. They think, oh, you beauty, we can stay home and play games all day on the computer. But then it reaches a stage where they need to do something else. You can play for so long on a computer, but you need to be able to go out and exercise and jump up and down and see your mates and your kids. So the kids themselves actually show signs of stress as well. It's been not a very good time for anybody, but acceptance of the situation I have seen from people who have just said, well, this is just the way it is. And because of where I live, it's the isolation is just a natural thing for us. So it's not a really big deal. You just think, oh, well, okay, then that means you just can't go to town. It's just, like I said, very evident with people that now we're getting to see them out and about. They just thought, wow, they actually speak to people I never would have spoken to before. You see in the streets, and then shopping malls, you think, oh, hi, how you going? All right, are you okay? And it's been pointed out to us a few times when we've been on a shopping foray that people have actually intentionally come over to say g'day. And it's back to where Alice Springs used to be 40 years ago. You'd load anybody, and with development over the last years and with everybody being busy, they have no time to say g'day to anybody. But now it might have been a good thing, but interaction between others is really come to the fore now, and it's really quite nice to see.
Excellent. And how are you finding it up there in Queensland, Adrian?
A few different things, Alan. For myself personally, not very much changed. Probably the only thing that really changed for me was the ability to run some live workshops. I was still on the beach every morning, every afternoon. The gym was closed, so I didn't get the gym, but I was still able to exercise. Work-wise, I was probably busier because there was a lot of people, as Michael was pertaining to, there's a bit more stress, a bit more challenge in relationships. So I was doing a bit more relationship counselling. But for myself, what I really felt from a bit more, probably from a planetary perspective, was the ability for the planet to have a bit of a breather, to have a bit of a rest. no airplanes in the sky, little pollution, things are being cleaned up. So I think from a global perspective, there's a real positive behind it. So I'm trying to look at that, because certainly the world had a breather for the last 3 months, which is a good amount of time. I'm calling it a bit of a reset. Personally, it's a reset time for myself. What's post-COVID? I'm doing some new business with a new business partner for post-COVID, what's going to unfold in the business corporate space. So I know there's been quite a lot of challenge around people's, particularly finance, around business and in relationship. But I think it's also a great time for people to reevaluate where they're at in their lives. Looking at multiple streams of income, if they suddenly found themselves broke by why? Because maybe they didn't have the education or the ability to look at other multiple streams of income. Relationship, a great time to go and see a relationship counselor. Great time to learn to meditate, stop stress. That's probably what I've been teaching the most with most of my clients, is just meditation. So personally, I've actually quite enjoyed the quiet time because I'm on the Goldie, so no tourists. I know financially it's been tough. But personally, I've actually enjoyed the time to self-reflect because I'm lucky enough to be in that financial position where I can do that, have the headspace to do that. So my teaching for others has been to try and get in that space too. Because if there is another outbreak at some point, I'm sure there's going to be more, let's call it more global lockdowns for different reasons. And if people aren't prepared, this is a good opportunity to be prepared. That's how I see this whole last 3 months. So both positive and challenging.
Yeah, well, both Thomas and I are in Newcastle. Thomas, I'd reckon that you'd probably get out more than I do because you work in town, whereas I'm working from home. So you'd be seeing a little bit more than I'm seeing.
Yeah, just quickly, Adrian, where's that photo of? Because I swear that looks like Newcastle.
No, it's actually not. I've been to Newcastle Beach. I was there with Alan last year, but this is Byron Bay.
It's still New South Wales, so we're winning.
It's the same ocean.
Just better beaches in Queensland.
Oh, yeah. Well, this is actually New South Wales. This was Byron. So
yeah,
where I was at the weekend, actually.
Yeah, I get out and about a lot, which is a good thing and a bad thing. But there has been a lot of change, and good and bad. There has been a lot of turmoil, good and bad. And for me personally, coming into COVID and during the COVID period, it was a responsibility breather for me. I took the opportunity to work from home, and I then started to reassess my responsibilities in my life and ask myself, is this how I'm going to re-enter into a post-COVID world? And 9 times out of 10, it was no. And so in that moment, I in a sense meditated. I wouldn't call it meditate. I just became comfortable with being alone. Not that I wasn't already, but it was just even greater to spend time that I literally had to do because we were in isolation or working from home. So I took that on and did that. And so I think from a community point of view, and Alan, you know this, but currently my office is in the Life Church and Soul Cafe building here in Newcastle. And at the time of pre-COVID, I was stepping into an employment position here at Soul Cafe. And I have been volunteering here at Soul Cafe for the last 4-ish years. And so I think the biggest highlight for me working closely with Soul Cafe and for Adrian and Michael and listeners, Soul Cafe is a community response to a deep community need. And so we feed homeless people and provide food and support for homeless people here in Newcastle because it's more than a meal, but the meal meets the need. And the generosity of community. And we don't get like there's times where we get government grants and stuff like that, but we aren't government funded. And so the community kind of dictates how long or how much exposure and help that we're going to give to those people. So we're not meeting with government officials and they're pulling the pin because they just feel like it. It's actually showcasing how much of a need this city needs Soul Cafe. And Rick Prosser, the CEO, says, if we were to shut down tomorrow, would our community be better off or worse off? If we close the doors, and we absolutely would be worse off without Soul Cafe. So the generosity, I think, has been a massive like praise point in a sense, or a positive coming out of this, because like in the midst of so much isolation and that Soul Cafe and the generosity of supporters has seen close to $300,000 come in over the last 3 months, 4 months in the challenges that we face and what Coles and stuff like that are doing. And so we've had to adapt really quickly to the changing model, but the generosity of community never stopped. And when we hear about, as Michael said, domestic violence, I'm seeing the ads on TV, which are very confronting. Not because I was complacent with the ideal of it before, but the reality that it's actually getting worse. It's not getting better. With the turmoil with George Floyd and Black Lives Matter, with being a part of, excuse me, Miramar for Life and the Rema FM team here in Newcastle. They just come off a Remathon, their Remathon, which is their annual budget fundraising campaign, and the generosity saw them hit 112% of their budget or target. And so like the generosity is continually going because people are now valuing the good things in our society and blessing the people and pulling people out. And I think that's the greatest part. And I'm not sure what it's like in Alice Springs or the Goldie, but I'm sure you can speak and agree with this, Alan, that Newcastle is such a well-supported community city that when we value something in our community, we invest heavily into it. And yeah, it's quite an awesome experience. And I'll come back to this later if it's fitting, but like, just seeing the people that just yesterday come out for the second Black Lives Matter rally here in Newcastle. It's an honour to be a part of, and it's an honour to see the voice that we have. And it was a mixed crowd. It was it was cookies and cream kind of ice cream experience, you know. Like there was us First Nations with our white brothers and sisters, and it was really, really cool. So
yeah, so we can go from two extremes, can't we? We've got the generosity on one side, and we've got this escalation of suicides and domestic violence. Now, Alice Springs is a place that I don't really know much about, having not actually been there. So not knowing what the lifestyle is like there, or even what the population. How many people do you have there roughly in Alice Springs, Michael?
Approximately 25,000.
And it's spread out over a large area or a small area?
No, it's actually in the middle of a mountain range, basically. It's interspersed with hills all through it. It's not just whacked in a valley. It's just spread over a large area now. Yeah.
Right. So do you find that that's increased the isolation that people were feeling, or lessened it?
No, not really. If people choose to be isolated, they are. It's an oversized country town. That's all it is. It's or a miniature city, if you really want to look at it that way. The majority of the population here come from somewhere else in Australia, around the world. It's they're born and bred people. Very, very, very few people who are born and bred here nowadays.
So the domestic violence that we're hearing about, is that spread out? Are you finding much there in Alice Springs, or is it more towards the cities that we're getting this sort of thing?
Well, the thing that we've seen is we're exposed to a lot of Queensland news here. Or pretty well everything that we get comes via through a microwave link. So all the news that we get in respect to world events comes from East Coast. Locally, we've always had a domestic violence problem here, and it's not improved, and it's not got on. The other case, it's gotten worse, but generally speaking, it's just the same, pretty well the same. It's just with isolation, there's lack of communication locally, and so you don't know exactly what's going on, but every now and again you see on Facebook, for instance, there's a couple of groups in town that indicate that there was people running around with machetes one night. There was a 90-year-old who had a house and a car rocked at 3 o'clock in the morning, things like that. You see what's going on, so you just tend to avoid things.
How about up in Queensland, Adrian?
Yeah, look, Alan, I run, as you know, an organisation called the Blue Wren Foundation. So we deal sort of front line with family conflict and family domestic violence. So I'm in touch with a lot of the organisations here on the Goldie, and the call centres here have been inundated with calls in the last 3 months. It's really spiked, particularly on that weekend, as normal, Friday, Saturday. A lot of it, the pubs were closed down, so there was a lot more alcohol intake at home. So that's probably got a big part to do with it. The tension at home, obviously, because people aren't leaving for that pressure cooker release. So the pressure's being held in the home. So there's been a huge, big lift in family domestic violence and conflict here on the Goldie, as it is right across Australia. Beyond Blue have been talking about it. I've been in touch with a few people down in Victoria with Beyond Blue, and it's the same right across the nation, and I'd suggest probably right across the world. It's just something that needs addressing more than ever, and I'm going to speak a little bit sort of sharp about, because it's both sides, it's male and female victims and abusers, but I'm just going to focus on the men at the moment. The men more than ever now need to do the self-responsibility about not stepping over that line in the sand, which is what we call our programs. And more than ever, it's about what can I do in my own relationship to stop any potential conflict so that I don't step over that line. And if I'm already stepping over the line, physically, emotionally, mentally, psychologically, financially, what can I do to seek support in that area? So first thing is about naming it in that space. So it has spiked. Some reports I'm hearing it's gone up about 40%, which is almost unbelievable, because already it's beyond the control. The police just cannot keep up. 85% of all police work now is focused on family and domestic violence. And border crossings now, of course, but we won't even go there. I just had that this morning coming to Queensland, so I got the border crossing thing. But, so the resources at the moment for the services, for the domestic violence services, for the police, it's they just cannot keep up with the call-outs. It's unbelievable, the amount. And so I don't know what the answer is post-COVID, but I'd suggest to any men, excuse me, in here at the moment who are feeling triggered or feeling stressed, contact somebody, contact myself, or probably Thomas in Newcastle, and Michael in Alistair and Alan. Reach out and seek help before it escalates, because the reality is, if you don't deal with it, it will escalate. That's just a stats. It just will. So get the help now, fellas, if you're listening in. And if you know somebody that you know needs the help, make the call for them. It's better to do it and get it wrong than not do anything at all, I'm telling you.
That's it.
It really is.
Exactly right. Yeah. And what's your experience with domestic violence, or the knowledge of all of that been, Michael?
Me personally, I don't have a domestic violence problem. Like I indicated on the pro forma, to accept a situation. If you can accept a situation and come to terms with it, it tends to take the immediate pressure off of you and those surrounding you. That's my personal experience. The resilience is it's a wonderful word that's been bandied about quite a bit, but to actually exercise resilience and say, well, how can I adapt? What can I do? What can I emulate to relieve a situation, an immediate situation, so that we can find direction and we can actually have a movement in a positive direction. It's been, like I said, it's been tough times, but for a lot of people, because of our isolation, again, as I mentioned, it's not really an issue. Adrian said that his situation hasn't really changed over the last 3 months. If anything, my position is intensified by not being able to go anywhere. I've actually been able to get a lot more do. I can concentrate on the things that you keep putting off. A lot of people have indicated that you can do your housework so many times and live by yourself or in situation of two people, you're much more comfortable. As soon as you move into a family situation, there's a lot more stress in families here now. Lots more stress now. When this first broke, the decree was given by the government, and the people from communities and outlying areas were given 14 hours to not be in town because the authorities tried to isolate the possibility of anybody catching this COVID-19 and taking it into communities, and also to relieve any immediate tension problems in town. And it was just like, wow, this is like Alice Springs was 40 years ago when I first got here. It was so quiet. It was really quite incredible, absolutely incredible. But slowly over a period of 3 months, it started to escalate again and things were more evident.
Yeah, and you're right too. The word resilience is bandied around a lot, and people say you've got to be more resilient and all the rest. But very few people who are banding the word around are actually giving advice or directions on how you can actually build that resilience, what things to do. And that seems to be the issue that I see most of all. Is we've got a lot of people that will say, okay, you need to do this, but very few that will, give you advice or show you how to actually do it. And the area that with domestic violence, we've got to look at the causes of that. And as you said, doing homework, housework and things like that, well, as you said, it's quite tough. I've had the opportunity to be able to get a lot of things done out of the way, being, virtually in my place on my own all the time. And so other than just dropping out very quickly at, say, 1 or 2 mornings a week just to grab something from the shops. So I went out this morning, back home by 8:15, all done. So I can now get into things. But you've either got the choice of sitting there and dwelling on the things that are getting you down, the isolation and everything else, or you can look at a positive, something else you can do that's more positive and get some things done. As you said, there's a lot of work that you've done, Michael, that you probably wouldn't have done otherwise because of the isolation's allowed you to do that. At the same time, I know, we talk about we've got to stop domestic violence, but really what we've got to go back and find out what's the cause of it, where's it all coming from in the first place. While we deal with the domestic violence, the perpetrator, for instance, and as we know, the figures were 1 out of every 3 was a male victim, and so it's not a gender issue; it's a society issue that we've got, and so that comes down to the way in which we handle things. But coming back and going, okay, well, the perpetrator, why is the perpetrator perpetrating taking these actions? What's causing that? And that's what we need to be having a good look at and working on. And whatever it is that's triggering, how can we turn that around?
Alan, if I might just speak on that, in the programs we run, so the Blue Wren Foundation, we run a 2-day program called the Line in the Sand program. And we actually address that with the men who come. And we say to men, it's not a perpetrator program. It's for any man, and I would suggest every man, to come and learn some upskilling in their relationship so they can prevent that from happening. Because a lot of people have, let's call it a normal life where things are ticking along and there's maybe not much conflict. But then something like COVID happens, or something happens where people lose a job, or something happens, or there's a death in the family. And then those triggers come into play. And if we're not prepared for those emotionally, for those possibilities, and we don't prepare for the prevention of that, I'm telling you, 99% of all men at some point will find a trigger that will take them over the line emotionally, psychologically, financially. I don't know one man on the planet who's never stepped over the line in the sand in a relationship, ever. Whether it's very subtle or whether it's not subtle, but we all do it. Every human does it.
Yeah,
so if we can learn some skills to stop ourselves doing that, I think that's the trick. And we've certainly, not just our organisation, but there are a few others out there who are doing not perpetrator programs. They're very different because that's working after the effect. We're all about prevention before the effect, and we're finding great results. Men going, oh, I'm not as snappy, or I'm not as conflictual, or I'm learning a different way to communicate. I'm learning about where my buttons get pushed. So it's about prevention for me.
Yeah. So with that, as you say, it's for all men. I would even say to the men who have got a fantastic relationship, just imagine what it'd be like if it was even better again. If you're really enjoying the relationship now, how much? So don't worry, put aside any fear of stigma of going along to one of these. Just go along and say, look, I've got a great relationship. I just want it to be better again. But also as men, we do have that camaraderie. We do support each other. So even if you've got a fantastic relationship, go along and learn more so you can help other men who are going through issues.
Yeah.
This is
We
where
had a
people
man
give
in-
back.
Sorry, Alan. We had a man in the Melbourne program. His name's Michael as well. And he said, and this has become our slogan when I'm doing my presentations. He says, I know I'm a good man, but I want to be a better man. And it's such a perfect slogan, because we can all learn something about being a better man in relationship, myself included. I've just been through a big thing with my partner, and had to learn some home truths about some of my behaviour, and got pointed out to me, and it was very humbling, very challenging as well, but very humbling to move through that and realise I've improved myself because some of my own behaviours, particularly around finance, I'm a bit flippant, and I was caught on it, and it was great to be caught upon my flippancy and non-responsibility around finance, because on some level there is a violation on some level in the relationship. I wouldn't give myself the abuser label, but there is some violation, and it's good to address it. It means I can prevent it from happening in the future. So I'm not squeaky clean either, and I do the work. So.
Can I speak into that, Alan?
Go ahead, Thomas.
Because Adrian, what you just said there towards the end of that is what I'm experiencing right now, and I live by myself. I happily live by myself, and I know Alan does as well. That might be a coincidence.
Newcastle.
But taking responsibility is something that as a young man is quite confronting. And talking about your course, your prevention course, what it was, it's not going to make you worse off. Like, that's what listening to that and you doing your sales pitch, it's not going to leave you worse off. It's only going to make you better. And so if that's as simple as what you need, go sign up to his course and do whatever you need.
There you go.
But it's simply that, like, when I look at a situation, I think to myself, what does love require of me right now? Yeah. And that's always out of a basis of faith, because I'm a Christian and love Jesus, but also out of a cultural love, and also out of a society love. And love is not pushing someone off a cliff. And I understand that we're talking about a very important topic, and I'm not trivializing it at all. But love is been an anchor. Love has been a support in a way that launches people to a new level. It's not an anchor that holds you there for the rest of your life. And I don't want to put that picture in people's minds, because it's not. We're seeing that with a lot of the domestic violence ads is love is keeping them there in a sense. And that's why I use the fingers. But it's not. And Alan, you said it as well. We've got to find the root of this situation. And so coming into the back end of what you're talking about, Adrian, is the finances. Like, I'm about to make the biggest decision of my life, and I'm only 26, and I'm about to financially become accountable for my finances. Now, it's gotten to a stage. Yeah, it's gotten to a stage where I'm taking a drastic action right now, and then for the next 3 to 5 years, I'm making sure that I steward well, and that's the word that I got, was steward. And so, what are the things that I need to do today, at a 26-year-old, to be able to steward well? And the finances is the worst part of my life, and the hardest part. And it's 9 times out of 10. Probably, or like, anyway, it's probably a lot of men's downfall is finances. There's a lot of pressure and struggle associated to that, because in our mind, we have a target or a date that we're going to be financially set. And if we don't meet that, like, it's normally around the 30, 35, 40 age. And I'm creeping up to that. I've got 4 more years to go before I'm 30. And you guys are let me speak to Alan about this one. He's probably 30 years beyond 40.
Oh, that's a call.
But it's I've got to keep going, because it's going to pull something out, and it's going to hit me. But But the pressure is real. Although we don't externalize it, although we don't voice it in that specific way, it's voiced in other ways. It's externalized in other ways, and unfortunately, sometimes that comes to domestic violence and broken marriages and stuff like that because of the pressure. And as a young man, and also stepping into culture, and Alan, I've spoken about this a lot, but over the last 6 years, I've learned to love my culture for what it is and for what I want it to be. And I know that's selfish, but my father grew up in an Indigenous family, and a hard Indigenous family. And so my goal in my next 5 years is laying the foundation to show my father through my eyes his culture, because he died, unfortunately, in 2011. And so through my eyes, I want to show him his amazing culture, because I know that he's with me all the time. And so I want to honor that and pay respects to that. Why? Because that's the decision I want. And also I want to be a change. I want to be a person that influences change in not only the world, but you know what? I want to influence change here in Newcastle. Our city is such a beautiful city. And I love my city so much, and I will go on holidays somewhere else outside of Newcastle. But my home is Newcastle. And when you have a love for a city, as strong as I do, you can't leave the place, because you just can sit and watch and listen and do nothing in certain spots around the city because of the love that you have for that city. So the change is what I'm excited about, because it's not only dealing with dreams and visions, it's making me accountable. And so my finances, and the crazy thing, like in my faith, God has shown me the blessing. I'm going to call it the blessing, and I've called it the blessing for a reason, because there's no monetary values or signs to the blessing, but the numbers are pretty big, and that is beyond my strength. And so I'm excited because the blessing is coming, but I've got to do this. I've got to take responsibility. I've got to man up, and I've got to be the man that my family needs, and my city needs, and my nation needs. So, and also my culture needs too.
Yeah, and Thomas, if I may, as an elder, like I'm 57, so I am a couple of years older than you. But I just want to pay homage and respect to you as a young man, speaking the way you do, in terms of, pulling yourself together and wanting to become a leader in your city. And I want to just give you some honor and respect for you, what you've just shared with us. So thank you.
Thank you, and I appreciate that too, because a lot of people think that I'm not Aboriginal because of my white skin. I'm a proud and deadly white Koori, and I love it. But yesterday at the march, there was something that was brought up that Aboriginal women are less defended than most other women, and what they did was they created a call of action for young men and women. Young men. To stand up and be warriors for our women. Yeah. And you know what? We need that. That's not indicative of culture. It's not indicative of religion. It's not indicative of the color of our skin. It's indicative of our hearts. And when we connect from heart to heart, there's a charity here in Newcastle called Collective Hearts, non-for-profit, and it's just a group of business people that come together and really go out of a spirit of love into non-for-profits and bless them. And so I love that ideal of collective hearts. When our hearts are collective together, great change will happen. Our cities are at our greatest, our communities are at our greatest. And that's what I want to be a part of. I want to create a city that has a collective heart.
Back in the 90s, I was a director of Hugs, which was Help Us Give Support, and that was finding support for all the different charities that we could find and bringing the charities together. But the thing I like about the Aboriginal culture is that the three pillars that it's built on: love, humility, and respect. And really, those three pillars are pillars that should have that all of us should live by. You know, because if you have love, which is important, the humility, so you're not into the ego. It's not about being a man, or the man, I should say. It's about being a man, and the respect that we have for each other.
Yeah, absolutely.
We live by that, then we've got a good foundation. The question is, how do we instill that foundation across the nations? How do we get that to more people so they understand? Because a lot of people are caught up in their ego, which is all caught up in their trying to survive, their lack of self-esteem and things like that. And it's hard to think of anybody else when you're in that particular state.
And not only that, I think, and 100% agree, I think it's also hung up in passion. Because, like, especially, I'm just going to take the march, for example, yesterday. And we come out as a peaceful protest, and that we want to acknowledge and respect not only the young kids that are there, but also our elders. And so not to give the police a reason to arrest us. And so that line was starting to come close to being crossing. I sensed, and I wasn't sweet with that. And so my initial response was to speak love over the police officers. They're there for a reason, but I'm not dismissing the past of our culture because of the brutality that has happened. But I'm not going to speak down to someone because someone else's passion. We're in a time right now that we are able to build bridges if we are ready to build bridges. And that's what I want to be. And so if, yes, I'm a part of a protest, but also too, I'm also about loving those that might wear a uniform, because we all have a uniform that we wear.
That's true. Michael, you got any thoughts on all of that?
Yeah, but I come from a different perspective, and I just let people each to be their own. And if everybody's got their rights to have their own opinions and views, and the First Nation stuff, it doesn't really sit all that well with me, because I actually go back a little bit further than that. If you want to start to talk about Pygmy Australians, that's a really, really interesting topic, and what happened to them. This chappie that was killed over in the States, it's a very unfortunate circumstance and incidents, but I think it's been played out of proportion by the media to a large degree. It's been now used as an advocacy or an axe to grind for a lot more people to get what they want, as opposed to address the issue, the situation, and resolve what's going on. A lot of things that I come across, if they're dealt with as an issue, they never become a problem. People let things blow out of proportion and become a problem. It's just a situation that you've got to, back to where I was before, about accepting what has happened in a lot of circumstances. You really have to accept things on face value rather than label it and redesign it and put your take on it.
So my view on looking at things is I look at inclusion as opposed to segregation or separation.
Yeah.
And you know, when the term Black Lives Matter came up, I said all lives matter. And
exactly right.
Recently, I actually was then called, because I said all lives matter, I was told that I was a privileged white man.
Yeah.
And
well, you're right.
Just shook
yeah,
my head
you're right.
at that one.
You know, when you yeah, it's about, like I said, I sort of view it from a different race. We've got a lot of antisocial issues here. It's not just black or white or Hispanic or Asian or Filipinos or whatever brand you want to put, or the culture you put. We've got a lot of issues here. And it's across the board. Everybody has them. It doesn't matter who you are or where you come from. All these issues here. There's relational issues. There's marriage issues. There's just general racial issues. It's all depends what happens at the time. We've got a lot of problems with kids in town, and it's particularly black versus white, and it's just plain and simple. That's all there is to it. There's no messing around with that. But the language that comes out of the kids is just horrific, absolutely horrific. I would get banned from being on any program if I started using that. But because people know how to work the system they use to work against the people who try and enforce the rules and trying to do the right thing for the general population. That's pretty well how it comes across here. I mentioned before about a 90-year-old having a house stoned and bashed. They do that for enjoyment, for entertainment, because they've got nothing else to do. Because they haven't been given the resources to go and do something, so they choose not to. Choose to sleep through the day and harass people at night. We've had situations in the last 6 months where, as Thomas mentioned about police, people see police as an authoritarian figure, and it's got to a stage where we've had to have police involved in a lot of things that they have no need to get involved in, but because it's out of control. It's as soon as people start waving a banner, and then you get others who think, wow, this is a really good cause, we can get some mileage out of this, and they find police a disruptive influence to what they want to achieve. That's when problems and issues start. Then there's the them and us situation, and that can only escalate into some form of violence or some negativity towards the community in general, because police are there to do a particular job, and that's what they do. And so everybody's anti-police. It's just wrong. So if you accept people for what they do and who they are, then there won't be half as many problems or issues.
Exactly. So my second oldest boy is a policeman, and I know his heart and I know his passion to help people. So I get a little bit annoyed when I hear people just, tarring every policeman with a bad brush. The whole thing is, if we, stop looking at gender, we stop looking at colour and everything else, and start looking at everything as a whole, then we start making some headway. Because there's a lot of different groups out there that support women, but there's very few that support men in comparison. We know that as far as suicides in Australia, there's 8 people that attempt suicide or commit suicide every day of the year, and 6 out of the 8 are males. Now, if we were spending more time helping the males to find out why the men are doing the things that they're doing, and whether it be domestic violence or committing suicide or violent offences against people, then the recipients of that are the women and the children.
That's right.
We need to start looking at things as a greater whole, instead of just saying, oh, we've got to work on this. And then as soon as we see an escalation over here, we run over there and go, okay, now we're going to fix that. And there's an escalation somewhere else, and we run there and try to do that. If we're human, everything is, we shouldn't be looking at race or anything else. There is only one race, and that's a human race.
That's right. Adrian mentioned before, one of the issues pertaining to COVID-19 and some of the domestic violence problems are coming about as a result of alcohol. It's very right. We actually picked up a Woolworths magazine, just a general grocery magazine. They also have their alcohol section in it, and Coles do as well. If you actually bought over, I think it was $60 or $70 worth of alcohol, you've got a discount. You go more alcohol, but they didn't do that for groceries.
No.
You think, hang on, why take advantage of this sort of situation? Well, they know that is a big issue. I don't know what it's like in your areas, but then they're just their general run-of-the-mill, pick it up or get it delivered to your mailbox sort of brochure. They are actually advertising alcohol at a discount if you bought a sizable volume of it. And I think, wow, this is just wrong. This is just totally wrong. It's escalating a problem, and particularly now. The money that's been spent on alcohol in this town has been superseded by its normal daily figures. The Territory used to be the highest population per capita of alcohol consumption in Australia. And when something like this came along, you think, oh, I wonder what's going on out there now. It's just wrong.
Yeah. Instead of trying to stop the alcohol and saying, look, we should reduce the amount of alcohol purchased, well, the question is, why is it being purchased in the first place? I know it's being promoted. Every time I buy a new book, which is regularly, they turn up, because I buy them through online, because there's no bookstores around the area, and there's always a discount for wine, for the wine club. And I'm going, you're bombarded with it all the time, so people will then go, oh, I'll do that. Next thing you know, they've got an addiction. What we should be doing is looking at, well, why do we need that in the first place? What can we do at the front end, alternately, that changes that.
Alan, I see it as a legal drug trade. It's the legalized drug trading for me. I don't drink. I don't do alcohol. It's choice by choice. I think it's something I've chosen not to do from myself and my relationship. But it's legal drug trading. The bottle shops didn't close down all the way through COVID.
That's right.
The one here, they closed the local shops down where I couldn't go and buy a bun or some needy thing, but I could go and get a bottle of scotch if I chose to. And that's so the priorities are upside down, absolutely upside down. And when I've traveled to the Middle East a lot, where alcohol isn't part of the culture, and there is still domestic violence, there's still oppression of women, blah blah, but the physical violent act of family and domestic violence is about 60% lower than it is in the Western world, for the mere fact there's no alcohol. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, because it does, and there's still oppression of women, etc., through religion. But in terms of the escalation of violence with alcohol, Friday, Saturday, or in their case,
as you say, it's not the cause of it.
It's not there because the alcohol doesn't trigger it.
As you said, it's not the cause of it because they still have it, but it's less. So the alcohol just makes it easier for it to actually happen in your area. But there's still a cause behind that. We've still got to get to that. We do that, then we're getting somewhere.
So Alan, in all the work I've done in the last 20 years around this, I come to 2 points generally, particularly for men. One is life purpose, and the other is connection to spirit. And I'm not talking religion, because I see them a little bit differently, because more wars have started through religion than any other cause. But if you have a spiritual bent, and you have a purpose, you're less likely to get into that conflict or family domestic violence situation, because there's more sense of wholeness. So there's a huge correlation of doing personal development work and lack of conflict. I try to get away from family and domestic violence language. I call it family conflict more than anything. I'm trying to change the paradigm of the language around it, even so we don't get triggered by it. But even it still happens, but it's less than. And I'd rather work towards less than not work at all.
That's it.
If we can do the less than by getting into our purpose, getting into some sort of sense of spirit or nature, it lessens it. So for me, they're the anecdotes for family and domestic violence: is get on track, get your purpose, get some sense of spirituality or spirit around you, and it will lessen, because we feel better about ourselves. I feel better about myself, so I'm less triggered by my partner or somebody in my vicinity. Because I feel good about me.
And I prefer the word, as you said, conflict, because the violence is what comes from it. The conflict happens beforehand, and that's where we should be focusing on, not the actual violence itself, but what's causing it back to the other area. But the other thing you mentioned about through religion and that, more wars, we've started with that. Really, religion was used as an excuse to start a war. It was agreed or whatever behind it. So it's the same thing as getting down beneath it and going, the same like the violence that's happening today in a lot of the protests. As you were saying, Michael, it's an excuse to act out something else. Because to go and wreck your own neighbourhood because you're angry at somebody else is quite insane. There's got to be something else completely, something completely different going on in the background. And just finding those, understanding that.
Yeah, and I don't think it's what Michael's suggested before. It's back to love, but I would even go further. I'd say it's back to self-love, because if you love yourself, you wouldn't be in that act of violence.
That's it.
Because it's just a projection of actually what we're doing to ourselves, and that's why people drink or take drugs or do whatever they do, because the lack of love is there. There's a self-hatred, if you like, and then that gets projected out onto the world or to those we potentially feel like we love. So for me, it's all about, back to love, back to self-love. Continually, it's the message that's been on the planet for 60,000 years. It's like, just love yourself and all will be well. And there's a lot of truth in that.
I've been talking about that with bullying at school and things like that. It's if you're happy, you don't go and bully somebody else. And that was the solution. Beating a bully up, well, that's how they became bullies in the first place. They've been oppressed or whatever, so they go out and they perpetrate that against somebody else, because that helps them feel better about themselves, because there is no self-love. And so when you're able to bring that level of your own self-esteem and self-love up, if you're happy, you're too busy being happy to worry about going and doing something else.
Yep.
So while you protect the person who's being bullied and help them to feel better about themselves, and so you build their self-esteem up, and if you do build their self-esteem up, that reduces the impact of the bully on them straight away.
Yes.
But as we've known, so if we're looking at bullying in the schoolyard, when they suppress that by having older kids protect those kids, and they said, oh, we've fixed the problem. No, they hadn't. Cyberbullying went through the roof because the bullies had to be able to get to their victims, because if they didn't, they just got more frustrated and felt more lousy about themselves, which made them more violent. So you don't go and grab a bully by the throat and throttle them. You know, you disempower them first of all, so they don't have their victims to work on, and then you raise their self-esteem up. You know, you show them some love. You actually show them and guide them through. So if once they're happy, they're not interested in going and bullying anybody.
Give them a sense of purpose.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Just a little story, if I may, Alan. I used to do a lot of schoolwork in the Tweed Valley and through Queensland here, and we used to walk into a room we used to get the naughty boys, you know, the year 10, 11, 12 boys, and there'd be about a dozen of them, and they'd be the unruly ones. The future world leaders, I used to call them anyway, but that's another story. But I would walk into the room, the chairs would be set up in the circle for, 12, 14 boys, and I'd walk in with my co-facilitator, and all the children would be, all the boys would be sitting in the circle, and I'd pick out the bully alpha male in the room like in 2 seconds, and I'd go, damn, I've left a box on the bonnet of my car. And I'd go, would you, let's call it Mark, would you, Mark, just mind running up to the car park, grabbing the box off the car and bring it back? I've given him a sense of purpose straight away. I've moved all the kids, so there's one seat left in the circle. Guess who it's next to? Me. And he's my 2IC for the 10 weeks I'm with the class. At the end of that 10 months, a transformation in that one boy, in terms of being a bully, is stopped 90% of the conflict in the classroom. Because I've done two things. I've given him a sense of purpose, and I've engaged with him in a positive manner. So it's not rocket science. It's just about knowing how to work with bullies. Like it's not hard.
Yeah. Well, I was lucky when my two boys, older boys, were still in high school. There'd been a father who'd been going around the schools because his daughter had been raped by some of the boys in the school. And he was going around all the different schools running a program called Fathers Against Rape. And we got a letter asking, as fathers, if we'd go into the school to sit in one of the sessions. Well, at Newcastle High School, there were only two fathers that went in, me and another guy. And they had the boys set up into different classrooms, but we thought we were going to be in the same room as our sons. We weren't. We were put in a different room. And so they'd run a scenario where they'd ask the boys a question, and the boys would answer it. And I cringed with some of the answers that were coming out. And I'm going, where do they get this rubbish? And then I thought, where are all the other fathers? No other fathers are there. So they were getting it from their mates. They weren't getting it from adults. They were getting it from the schoolyard. And they run it like a hypothetical. So they'd say, right, well, if that's the case, then what about this? And then what about that? So my job was to sit there and scribe most of the way through it. And by the end of it, these boys went from what looked like little schoolyard idiots to these 6-foot men by the time they walked out, because they'd actually worked out and reasoned and understood, and they're going, and they actually found the answers themselves by being guided through this hypothetical. And the good thing was, at the end of it, they asked me to, for me to do a bit of a recap on it. Well, I used to find there were anything up to 15 kids in my house when boys come home from school. I'd go to the gym in the afternoon. I'd come back by the time they were home from school, and there'd be anything up to 15 kids there. And they'd all leave as I went through to get the shower and come back again, and everyone's gone. Well, after this event, I came out one day and they're all there. And in fact, one of the young guys said to me, Mr. Stevens, would you like a drink? And he goes to my fridge to get me a drink. And after they'd gone home, I said to the boys, I said, well, what changed? Why are they all here? And they said, they reckon you're pretty cool. Yeah. And that's because of the conversation, like you have done with this young fella. They were guided through this hypothetical. They came up with the answers. They then took ownership of that. And I made this comment because I was part of that group. And when they felt much better about themselves, of course, they thought I was cool. Yep. But it was all about them feeling cool about themselves.
And Alan, you showed you cared. You turned up.
Yeah. And that's one of the things, I've put this out to all the fathers out there, whether they're separated from their kids or not, is, how can they actually connect more with their children? How can they get involved in that? Because if they love, as all parents, we love our children. Well, it needs our involvement for them to be able to grow up the best possible way. And like most men, we feel that we've got to, bring the money in and everything else. There's a lot of pressure on that. We're noticing that right now with people not bringing as much money in and the pressure on the relationships. But I'd say this to both parties: what is the most important thing to you? Now, you've got children and everything else. Is it your family, or is it the next Nintendo or whatever it is you're going to buy? Where is your real focus? Have that sense of purpose as you were talking about, and discover what that is. I think that's really important. Michael.
No, very much so. It's very good way. You actually have to prioritise what's going on. What are your priorities? What is good for you? What is good for your relationship? What is good for your family? What is good for your kids? And if you're the person in charge of the nucleus, the family, you really have to assess everybody's needs and requirements before you make a positive decision in any direction.
And what thoughts have you got there, Thomas? I can see you're deep in thought.
I'm just, again, I've just been so grateful to be on a Zoom or Campfire project that has so much goodness. And kudos to you, Alan, for creating this space, because like Michael and Adrian have different views, but they're still my uncles. Like, I love them, and I've only just met them. So like, I know that there's things that I believe, and I know there's things Michael and Adrian believe, and they're different, but I still love them. It's still the society that we live in and stuff like that. So yeah.
Well, here's a question that's completely separate to the discussion today, and this one's for Adrian and for Michael. I want to get more involvement in the panel discussions and things like that. What do you reckon? It's probably about time that we had panel discussions with all the young fellas. And Thomas, would you like to run one of the panel discussions coming up in the future and have young people in there? And I won't be on screen. I'll be sitting back like I do with Scott when he's doing his Facebook Lives. I'll be sitting there watching it like everybody else and enjoying it.
Man, I would be so honoured. I love and the Campfire Project. I am happy to invest heavily into that because of what it brings, and I value it so much. So yeah.
Alan, I'd suggest one thing: if they're going to do that, they have to light their own fire. You're not to light it for them. They have to learn to light a fire. So that's part of being a man. That being able to light a campfire. So I'd suggest, they have to bring the wood and the matches and actually light the fire and learn to do that. That's part of the initiation.
What are matches?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Sticks. Yeah. Yeah. I've got the sticks. I can teach you how to light fire with sticks. I do that. So.
Well, at primary school, I got taught to use a magnifying glass to burn the paper for a cigarette.
Ah, there you go. There you go. Yeah. 40,000-year-old magnifying glass.
So what do you reckon, Michael?
Oh, interesting. Well, Adrian, actually, I've got a suggestion, which may be of assistance to you. You alluded to you were 26 years old, you're a young man, and 30 to 40 was the aspiration of where you really needed to know where you were going. Between 26 and 30 is 4 years. You've got a lifetime in front of you. Go and use it.
Absolutely. And I'm excited because I have a lifetime in front of me. So I've just got to commit the next 5 years that I should have committed 10 years ago to get back on track.
Don't live in hindsight. You cannot change hindsight. Just
absolutely.
Best you can with what you got for as long as you have.
Yeah.
Who was it? Groucho Marx, I think it was. He said that he's going to live forever or die trying.
I reckon. Oh, that's good. I might steal that one myself. That's one of the reasons why I have the panel discussions. I get all these great little tidbits and everything else, and I go, "Oh, I'll steal that one." This is where I get my material. Jeez, it doesn't come from wisdom; it comes from stealing it from you guys.
If we're into dad jokes, I'll just share another Groucho Marx because I love Groucho Marx. He went to join a gentleman's club, And he put in the application, and they came back and said, yeah, you've been accepted. He said, I refuse to join. And he said, why? He said, I refuse to join because you would let somebody like me join. Gotta love him. Gotta love Groucho.
I'm sure that Thomas and all the younger ones are going, who the hell is this guy?
Yeah, who's Groucho Marx? The Marx brothers, mate, and it's not the Communist Party.
Oh, great. Okay, well, thanks, guys, for coming along and sharing your stories and wisdom today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
And the fact that you're all over the different parts of Australia. You got some of those boasting about the warmth up there in Queensland.
That'll be me.
But Adrian, Thomas and Michael, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. And to everybody else who's been listening in, we'll see you on the next Campfire Project. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Cheers, fellas.